All right. So welcome everybody. Welcome to the already seventh part of the Drought Learning series. We want to talk about the drought. So my name is Karen Dahl. I'm working for the German Red Cross, and together with Gigma Kiswinda and Dorothy Heinrich, we are organizing this Drought Learning series. And yeah, very warm welcome to everybody that is here for the first time, but also great to see familiar faces. So how do I, as you can see, we started our journey in the Drought Learning series in mid of February, where we started off with the more big picture session of, okay, what is like, how do we conceptualize drought as a humanitarian issue, and what is the role of the Red Cross and Red Crescent within this? And then we had two dedicated sessions on understanding drought risks, in which we try to first understand drought as a hazard and its impacts. So understanding more, okay, what do we actually mean when we talk about drought? And then in the second session, we were looking into underlying drought risk factors. So what is contributing to the overall risk towards drought? And there we looked into vulnerability and exposure factors to understand better, okay, what, again, how do we understand drought risk? And then to think about what can we actually do about it. The next two sessions were about forecasting drought. So on the one hand, we looked into current drought forecasting tools. So what is available, so to say, on the global market when we talk about drought forecasting. And then in the second session in mid of April, we looked into developing drought triggers for drought anticipatory actions. So how do we come from the forecast actually to the trigger of drought early actions? And now we are basically in the third block, where we discuss acting early before drought. And last session, end of April, we looked into the theory of change for drought early actions. And in today's session, we want to understand better how we can use cash-based actions for drought. We will close in 2 weeks' time with a session on, again, like one of those large big picture session, where we want to wrap up a little bit. What have we learned in the past weeks, in the past month, basically, yeah, basically look into, okay, what is happening next? So we want to understand compounding risks a bit better, and what is the implication of climate change when we talk about drought. Yeah, there's still, I mean, you can still register for the session next, for the eighth session next time. That is still the same link as the one today. And if there's any questions, please reach out to me, Gigma, or Dorothy, with any more questions or ideas or follow-ups or whatever it is that you need. As always, a bit of housekeeping, for which I would like to hand over to Dorothy.
For those of you who've been in the 7 previous sessions, this is going to be really familiar. But just in case you're joining us, welcome. So each of the sessions are about an hour. We have kind of been quite liberal with our interpretation of it, because we know that people want to keep going with conversations. And so we do leave the Zoom room open for about half an hour after the session to let people have informal conversations. If you want breakout groups, if you want to ask specific questions, there is a more informal time for you to have on that front. So please do stick around if you can. To communicate, we do want this to be like, this is a learning series. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you're thinking. So please do use the Zoom chat as much as you want. Stream of consciousness, share resources, anything you'd like. It's really there for your use. We have simultaneous translation into French today, thanks to IFRC. I think it's important that we be able to bring these types of conversations to as wide linguistic diverse audience as possible. So we thought it was very important to have this. So if you are tuning in and you would like a French translation, it's really easy. All you have to do is kind of click the little interpretation button at the bottom. And I'll put instructions in the chat as well. And then we'll share a link to a Slido, which we're using to kind of basically collate a lot of questions. So we're taking collaborative notes as well, which I will share the link in the chat in 2 seconds. Basically, the idea is that we want to create resources after this learning series. It's 8 series, but now we want to know, we actually want to have a record of it. So your questions are also helping us kind of set research agendas. They're helping us understand what people are keen to hear about, etc. And yeah, so I'll put the link. You can contribute to the collaborative notes. You can take whatever you want from them. You can add to them if you will. It'd be really nice to have people's thoughts on that as well. And then just a quick plug for the next session. If there's anything specific you'd like us to talk about in kind of our final big wrap-up session of the Drought Learning series, shoot us a message. We'd absolutely love to hear from you. So we are crowdsourcing ideas and want to know what you all want to hear about. So there we go. Back over to you, Karen. Enjoy the session, everyone.
Yay. Thank you. Thanks so much, Dorothy. So for those of you who have not yet joined, you see either the Menti code on the top here, or I think Dorothy also shared the Menti link already in the chat. Before we dive into our sessions and our speakers and the presentations, I want to start with a little bit of understanding of what is the audience doing already in terms of cash. And so my first question to everybody is, let's find some space here. I or my organization, the organization I work with, have experience with cash, and now you can vote, as an early action, as a response action, or you don't have experience at all. So I would be super interested to understand how many people have used cash in their different contexts already. Okay, we see, there's quite some experience in the room of people that have used cash as an early action already, but more so as a response. I'll wait a bit more, okay. Super. 9 people have voted. I'll wait a little longer to see if anybody else wants to join in. Okay, we see more cash as a response, 10. Okay. If you'd like to, you can also pop in the chat for which hazards you've used cash as both as an early action or a response, and maybe you can put in where you have used cash as an early action and where as a response, just to understand where our experiences are in this bigger group. Okay, but that's interesting to see. I mean, so we have quite some cash experience. It seems like everybody in this session today has experience in cash, which is great. More as a response than as a early action. Great. So maybe we can fill some of the knowledge gaps here, or you can get some inspiration. I have a second question for you, and that is, which impacts do you address? Oh, sorry, with cash, I put drought. Why on earth? But okay. So the question is, which impacts do you address with cash as an early action for drought? Sorry for the typo. So you can type in 1 or 2 words, or whatever comes to mind. So it can be cash, of course, both as a response, but more as an early action. Yes. So focus on the early action. Okay, we see food insecurity. That seems to be the main impact that we address with cash as an early action. Okay, basic need, food access again. Okay, impacts on education, gender-based violence, basic needs, livelihoods more in general, not only food security. Okay. What is new? Drought and Zoot. Okay. We see lots of food insecurity. So this word cloud, the more often a word is used, the bigger it comes. So we see that cash is used a lot as an early action to address food insecurity. Okay, we see also negative coping mechanisms. Okay. Livelihood, what is new? So drought impacts. Okay. Thank you very much. So we see that we use cash as a lot to tackle food insecurity that is a result of the drought. Okay, I think that maybe that helps us already a little bit to conceptualize. Okay, where does cash make sense? Maybe what are we trying to address? I will stop sharing my screen. Stop and come back to you. Great. So thanks everybody for this little warm up. We now want to dive into our two country contexts. So today we will first hear from Sibongile, who is the FBF coordinator at Lesotho Red Cross. And yeah, she will be talking about their early action protocol for drought in Lesotho. And next, we will hear from the WHH, the Welthungerhilfe in Zimbabwe, who's represented by Anastasia and also Julia. So great to have you all here. And so we will have like these two country contexts where we'll zoom into, we can see what is maybe different, what are the different contexts. So please feel free to pop your questions in the Slido, and then we will do the big question round later on. So Sibongile, the floor is yours, and please take us to Lesotho.
Thank you very much, Karen, and good afternoon to everyone. As mentioned, my name is Sibongile Hlubi, working for the Lesotho Red Cross as the focus-based financing project manager. But let me start with an apology that I'm not, my internet might not be reliable. So I won't do a video. So apologies for that. But basically, as indicated today, my role will definitely be to share our experience in terms of what we have done in developing the cash-based early actions in our drought EAP. So I would firstly want to give a summary of our current drought EAP, maybe for a understanding, just to have an insight of what we have in our EAP. We have our drought EAP, that was early action protocol, that was approved in November 2022. Also to say, this is our first early action protocol within Lesotho. So we would say this is our first experience as a country in general. But to highlight some of the key things in our EAP, we have prioritized two impacts, where we have food insecurity that is caused by crop failure as a result of drought. We also have a lack of access to early warning messages, which on the other hand also have an impact on food insecurity. We have two tied triggers, where we have our first trigger and our second trigger. But before going further, maybe I should also mention that in our first trigger, it's just what we're going to do there, it's just working around or looking into the seasonal outlook that would be provided by the Lesotho Meteorological Services. This is where we would activate the early action of dissemination of early warning messages. Then we have our second trigger, where this is where we are going to use funding from the TREF, where our second trigger is reached when our October, November, December rainfall is below normal, and the vulnerability assessment report indicate at least 20% of the population in IPC3 and IPC4. Maybe just to highlight on this, we focused on October, November, and December because that is a rainy season in Lesotho and also a planting season. So with limited rainfall, normally it's hard for most farmers to start plowing or cropping or doing summer cropping. As a result of that, the impacts, we have our early actions, which is the dissemination of early warning messages targeting 20,500 people, and unconditional cash transfers targeting 2,640 vulnerable households. In terms of weather forecast, in terms of the forecast information, like which is basically going to support our triggers, would receive that from our meteorological services in the form of a seasonal outlook. So to prepare for this, the activation of this early action protocol, we have some of the readiness activities that we will do, and we have already started doing. Firstly, it's to to build capacity within the Lesotho Red Cross and within the government in general about anticipatory action or focus-based financing. Since now we have talked about unconditional cash transfer, also there we would have prior agreements or MOU with mobile service providers in Lesotho to ensure that by the time we activate, at least we have those agreements in place. Again, on that, as part of the readiness activities, we have already started staff and volunteer training on cash transfers and monitoring on that. But this is just a summary of what we have in our AP. Now going into the theory of change to say, what do we really want to achieve in terms of this EAP? I've highlighted earlier that basically now going deeper into the cash-based early action, actually what we want to do in terms of our outcome or our objective is to improve household food security. As I indicated earlier that during drought, you find that because now there's no enough rainfall or delayed rainfall, we have challenges of most of the communities starting or planting or doing any summer cropping. Also highlighting that the main livelihood in Lesotho is out. So in a case where we don't have any rainfall or delayed rainfall, it becomes a real threat on the food insecurity part. So with the assumptions that we have basically now looking into the cash-based cash transfers, we assume that we would have infrastructure that would enable cash transfer. Infrastructure in this case, because we're going to use mobile cash transfer, where we would be using our current mobile network services, with the assumption that there's coverage within the country in terms of network, and also providing the electronic or the mobile cash transfers, availability of functional markets, and so on. In terms of what we want to achieve as part of the output short-term achievement, we are saying we want to support at least 2,640 households and in drought-prone areas in Lesotho with 772 maludi. I'm sorry for not converting this into the other currency per month for a period of 2 months. Going into the overview of our cash-based early action, as indicated earlier, we're going to cover our target population is 2,640 vulnerable households. But in this case, we are linking this anticipatory action to social protection social protection systems in Lesotho. So in this case, we would be targeting 2,640 vulnerable households under the public assistance waiting list. So the public assistance waiting list is one of the social protection programs that we have in Lesotho, which covers vulnerable households. In terms of cash transfer, this is where we are going to transfer at least 48 CHF for a period of 2 months from January to March. Maybe to also highlight on that, this is to say when we did the cash transfer rate or cash transfer value, that was last year, that was the current cash transfer value. But then we also have highlighted the issue of having the contingency budget. Hello? Okay. We have also highlighted the point of catering for the issue of inflation that may happen maybe if we have to activate at least 3 years from now to ensure that we still meet the food basket for the country by then. This is where in our budget we've also highlighted the 10%, which caters for the inflation rate. In terms of who are we going to use as the mobile service providers, currently we have got only two mobile service providers in Lesotho, where we have Vodacom and Econet. So these are the people, these are the financial service providers that we are going to use when we now talk about cash-based cash transfers. And maybe to highlight this again, this will be triggered by our second trigger, where I indicated that if we have failed or delayed October, November, December rainfall, and the Lesotho Vulnerability Report also indicates people being 20% of the population being in IPC3 and IPC4. What have we done before, maybe to where we are today? Before developing the early action protocol that we have today and we are talking about today, we did two kinds of assessments. These assessments were basically to give us the highlight of what is happening in the country in terms of drought, understanding drought risk in Lesotho, looking at different indicators, historical impact indicators, vulnerability, exposure, and coping mechanism. We did consultations with communities and stakeholders to understand how each indicator affected them or how they were responding to all these indicators. And from there, that is where we got all the findings of these early actions that we have. But again, on top of that, because now we realize that in Lesotho currently, because of the country's initiative to scale up shock responsive social protection programs, we had to do a supporting study, which we were going in depth of understanding cash-based shock responsive social protection and anticipatory action in Lesotho. This is where the findings of this study helped us a lot in designing the cash-based early action, where we started linking social protection programs in Lesotho for anticipatory action. Going in summary of the early actions that were identified by the two assessments in terms of ranking. We had I would say a lot of a list of early actions, but there are key that were highlighted by the communities and stakeholders as high priority. Unconditional cash transfers to address the issue of food insecurity, distribution of vegetable seeds and shade nets, dissemination of early warning messages, trainings on climate change and adaptation, and also on climate smart agriculture. So these are the few that were prioritized. But under this few that were highly prioritized, because of insufficient funds, our experience as Lesotho Red Cross and as a country in general, we were able to prioritize two impacts, which I mentioned earlier, which is the food insecurity and also lack of early warning messages. So as part of the early actions, we had the one we are talking about today, which is the unconditional cash transfers, basically targeting vulnerable households to meet the food insecurity. Now going into how this cash-based early action, where we are talking about unconditional cash transfers, was linked into social protection. This is where we are saying linking social protection to anticipatory action. In Lesotho, we have a different social protection program, but our interest came from the public assistance. This was what we were informed by the study that I highlighted earlier. Our interest was influenced by public assistance waiting list due to the following. One, because the public assistance waiting list is one of the biggest list or the largest list within the country. But because of our country financial status, where now we have lack of resources, you find that there are a lot of people who are in a public assistance waiting list, but however, they qualify to be part of the assistance, but due to insufficient funds, then they are on the waiting list. This means that these are vulnerable people who still meet the criteria, but unfortunately are not enrolled in any program. So they are still waiting to be enrolled anytime there's that opportunity. Secondly, we looked at the public assistance waiting list because we realized that during the response phase, because now I highlighted that we were also under the drought scoping study, we also wanted to know how other entities were responding, other humanitarian organizations, the government, and so on were responding in the previous round. That is where we the humanitarian aid or funding was basically for people who were already enrolled in one or any of the social protection programs. That is where we talk about vertical expansion. But then in this case, this is where we highlighted to say we will now talk about public assistance waiting list. Maybe to highlight that also what we did was not just working in isolation. This is what we were basically supporting the government of Lesotho because it has done a lot in ensuring that the country is moving towards shock responsive social protection. There are policies and framework in place, there are development systems in place, and also agreements that have been signed. So working closely with these government entities, we were able to ensure that the current early action protocol also support the government in various factors, also in ensuring shock responsive social protection. Maybe to highlight a few policies and frameworks that the country has in terms of that are talking about social protection, shock responsive social protection. I'll talk about maybe a few where we are talking about the National Early Warning Early Action Plan, the integrated policy framework for early action, and also the Lesotho Scalability Framework. These are all the documents that are used in terms of scaling up early warning, early action in Lesotho, and also scaling up shock responsive social protection. And the point, the systems that we currently have, maybe to highlight that also the Lesotho has the what we call the NISA, which is the National Information System, where it's more of a census-based system where people are, all the population or almost all of the population have information in that system, and they are categorized as per their wealth groups. So this is where we as Lesotho Red Cross and other stakeholders, we saw a synergy of saying, instead of going back to the communities, because of the short time to mention that, to start again community-based targeting, we can use the current NISA database and look for beneficiaries and who are on the waiting list of public assistance. Also to mention that already agreements has been signed, which are within 2 ministries or 2 departments that are basically working on disaster risk reduction and social protection in Lesotho, to ensure that with those stakeholders or departments working closely together, the issue of shock responsive social protection in Lesotho is really scaled up. All after these assessments and the development and the consultations that were done, lastly, we looked into the issue of monitoring, evaluation, and accountability. This is where we had the MNE or the meal component to say, let's see how best can we monitor our cash-based early action, so that anytime after triggering, we are able to say, did this this early action bring any change, or what has to be, maybe based on the lessons learned or challenges, what has to be re-looked into or reviewed to ensure that it is incorporated into our next EAP and for the overall future programming of the Lesotho Red Cross. All along this journey, we had challenges which we encountered, but maybe the major challenge that we can highlight is all these assessments were done during the COVID-19 pandemic, which was very difficult to visit communities and maybe having stakeholders partnership, but eventually we managed to do that. Again, the issue of data sharing, all these assessments and all this EAP was built on the evidence of data and analysis that was made. But because of the difficulty that or the challenge that we normally have as a country of data sharing, I'll say culture, with an data sharing regulations and protocol of where maybe to highlight that in certain kind of data, maybe social protection data, we know that is within the Ministry of Social Development department or the ministry. But then there are other social protection programs that are not organized, or maybe that are not fully integrated in the social development, social protection. Some are within other ministries and so on. So that was where the challenge was a bit, that is where we had more challenges. But however, that we were able to overcome that. In terms of what we have learned throughout this process, where we were identifying cash-based early actions, what we have learned and our best practices, we realized that working closely, not working in isolation, but working closely with different national authorities in Lesotho, Ministry of Social Development, Disaster Management Authority, and other developing partners and humanitarian organizations, made this approach to be owned by the government entities, and also ensuring the issue of sustainability. Again, what throughout the journey, we realized that involving the academia in terms of doing research and also assessment was also key, and it helped a lot in capacity building and building wider advocacy. Thank you very much. This is the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Mtsebongile, for sharing especially the last lessons learned, but also giving us the big overview of what has been done in Lesotho so far. Thanks so much. There's tons of questions for you in the Slido. However, I would like to hand over to Anastasia first, and then we can maybe tackle some of the questions jointly, because I assume that some questions might come back. But yeah, we'll come back to that later, and maybe you can already have a glance, Sibongile, at the questions in the Slido to see what's coming up. I hand over to Anastasia now, who will share experiences from Zimbabwe. So Anastasia, the floor is yours, and share your take us to Zimbabwe now.
Thank you so much, Karen. Let me try to share my screen. Wow, thank you so much. So I will try to share our experiences as Zimbabwe in trying to use the cash-based voucher assistance in trying to address drought-induced food insecurity in Zimbabwe. So my presentation is looking at the experiences that we had in administering that system, and not necessarily the processes that we did in coming up with the early actions. I will just mention that in passing. So to give a brief background and to contextualize the concept of anticipatory action in the Udhunga Youfe, we are one of the largest NGOs, German-based, with a number of clusters which include food security, wash, and logistics. So we are operating in more than 3 continents, more than 36 countries, with over 526 projects already done, assisting a total of around 60 million people, but with the main goal of zero hunger. So in terms of our of the way we are seeing things as a WHH, we are trying to advance the humanitarian paradigm shift, where we are saying we want to invest more in anticipation as well as preparedness and DRR, and less action around the response. So as you are seeing from these illustrations, we're saying this shift to see a lot of actions around resilience building, anticipatory action, as well as early action, as well as emergency preparedness and response planning. And little effort then will be placed around emergency response, as the loss and damage will be reduced by proactive actions. So to contextualize the focus-based action program, globally, this project was piloted in Madagascar. Then we replicated the same in Zimbabwe and Kenya. We started in March 2020 and ended the project in April 2023, funded by the GFFO. So in terms of the main vision of the project, it was around advancing the humanitarian paradigm shift, where WHH is also advancing the issue of anticipatory action in programming. Another issue that we also wanted was the issue of involving different stakeholders, since anticipatory action was like a new baby in Zimbabwe. So we wanted a lot of stakeholders, especially from the government side and other NGOs, to also take part and be involved in the processes of focus-based action. We also took that as an opportunity for us to engage other NGOs and advance the localization agenda, where local NGOs became custodians for our early action protocols. So to narrow down to the district that we implemented these early cash disbursements as part of anticipatory action. Our target districts were Chimanimani, Chile, and Matoho, but as WHH, I will concentrate more on Chimanimani districts, where our target wards were Ward 2, 3, 5, 8, and 20. In terms of identifying the wards, we used a participatory approach where we engage different stakeholders at all levels, so that we see, based on vulnerability as well as the impact of drought in the different wards across Chimanimani, the most vulnerable wards were selected. Then the objective of this intervention was to avert the negative effects of drought-induced food insecurity, where we are saying food insecurity is the risk and drought is the hazard. So we wanted our actions to try and reduce the negative effects that drought has on food insecurity, on food security for vulnerable communities. So our target for the program was around 1,200 households with an available budget of around 240,000 US. So in terms of coming up with this system, we adopted the ARV model that uses the water requirement satisfaction index as the drought monitoring indicator. We also used reports like the second round crop and livestock assessment to validate the outputs from the trigger model. So based on this model, our trigger phase was mainly at the end of season, where the drought indicator was indicating the number of people affected that were going to be affected by the level of drought that we will have experienced during the drought season. So from a lot of consultations, we also adopted the same approach that Lesotho used in trying to identify early actions, where we tried to identify the impacts the drought has on the communities, and also identify what they felt is the context-specific feasible early actions in their own wards. So the prioritized impact included loss of harvest, which is a source of personal food intake as well as income in most of these communities, since they rely on rain-fed agriculture. Then in terms of issues to do with household food security, livestock distress, as well as malnutrition, like I indicated, all our communities in the rural setups, they depend on rain-fed agriculture. So drought results in a lot of impacts in terms of the livelihood options as well as food security. Then in terms of early actions, a number of early actions were identified, which includes early cash distribution, income generating projects, trainings like financial literacy, trainings on IGAs, food hunger, as well as livestock feeds, vaccines, nutrition gardens, as well as rehabilitation of bores. But early cash and income generating projects were prioritized after our system triggered for the 2021-2022 season. So in terms of the actions that we promoted following the prioritization process, like I indicated, was around early cash distribution, targeting households which were vulnerable, as well as layering the early cash with trainings on financial literacy.
Sorry, go on, Anastasia.
Sorry. It's okay, thank you. So our target project participants were the vulnerable communities in the wards that we were operating in the sense that we wanted our households to use the early cash grants to prevent the negative drought coping strategy in case there is a drought. Then this resulted in stabilized food security in the targeted communities. Like I indicated, the issue of trainings and IGA's income generating activities were layered around these early cash disbursements. So in terms of selecting these interventions as our early actions, we also used the participatory approach, like I indicated, the same that Lesotho also applied, where we had general custodian activities, as well as the process of early action identification, where communities were at the core in identifying these drought impacts, these coping strategies, as well as the feasible actions in their areas. So in terms of validating all these processes, we worked with the different stakeholders at all levels, at community, at district, as well as inputs at national level in terms of validating the early actions that the communities brought forward as what they felt was the feasible actions in their context. So what we learned from the whole process of identifying these early actions was the issue of avoiding over-researching the communities. Like I indicated, it was a pilot for us in Zimbabwe. So we had to do processes and activities differently, like the identification process, we did it with the communities, then we went back to them for the validation processes. We also went there with the final document, all those processes. We felt it was like over-researching the communities. We just needed to kind of have the processes done concurrently, which were possible to do at the same time. So in terms of community, the targeting process, as well as the early action, the cash basket that we had for the communities. Each project participant was to receive around $12 per month, with a capping of about 5 members per household for 6 months, to support them for 3 months with the cash, then also the financial literacy trainings, as well as income generating activities, starter packs. So the $12 per participant figure came as a result of the recommendations from the National Cash Technical Working Group that we have in Zimbabwe, which is guiding all the cash disbursements across board for all of the different stakeholders that are into cash disbursements. So they have pegged or put aside a range of from $9 to $18 so as the benchmark for cash disbursements per participant. And according to this range, it's based on the minimum expenditure basket, where we are looking at the cereal, the pulses, as well as the oil requirements per participants. Then we also, in terms of the IGA trainings, it was guided by the different trainings that we did for the communities, where they managed to identify feasible IGAs that will support the cash disbursements. So before doing the cash disbursements, we realized it was very critical for us to do a cash feasibility assessment, so that we establish the context, as well as the political and legal acceptability of the cash or voucher system in the different wards that we're operating in. Then we also identified if financial service providers were available, and even the issue of the cash assistance modalities, the delivery mechanisms, and also issue of geolocation and functionality of markets, because it was going to make no sense if we injected the cash, but there are no available markets to buy the required food items. Sorry, just a moment. There is noise coming from the background. Yeah, I think it's okay now. So for the targeting processes that we did, the process was guided by food security indicators coupled with vulnerability indicators. So the communities were at the core in terms of identifying those households which were ranked most vulnerable. But for us to come up with the number of households, we also used information from the Department of Social Development, where they identified the number of households who were deemed vulnerable after the first and second round crop assessment report was out. So the communities managed to identify their own food security indicators as well as vulnerability indicators that they used to rank themselves across the whole village. So we also had processes of at the caucus meeting where we did bring forward the process of targeting as well as a selection of the beneficiaries, as well as the public address where we were communicating on the processes that we were going to use in selecting the different project participants. So like I indicated initially, our target was 953 households. But at the end of the day, we managed to reach out to around 1,223 households. Maybe I will explain to you later how this number increased to 1,223. Maybe like I indicated previously, our target was 953. But the recommendation from the district stakeholders was that based on previous experiences on cash voucher assistance in the district, they wanted everything to be uniform with regard to the way the cash distributions as well as the cash assistance works in the district that we're operating in. So they also recommended a capping of maximum 5 participants benefiting from each household. This resulted in the number of households increasing to 1,223 and not 953 initially targeted. So in terms of the timing, based on the crisis timeline for our interventions, like I indicated, the model that we adopted triggers at the end of the season, but we also made use of long-range forecasting information from the SACOF, the Southern Africa Climate Outlook Forum, as well as the National Climate Outlook Forum, to prepare and be ready for trigger, because these reports were indicating whether we're going to have a normal or below normal season. But based on this water requirement satisfaction index, then we could then determine whether we are activating our early action protocol or not. So in terms of our payout at the end of season, our season in Zimbabwe runs from around October until April. So the trigger phase runs between October to April. Then our payout for the cash was from May until June. Then we start implementing our cash disbursement from July up to September. Then we layered the issues of financial literacy training as well as support with starter packs from October. It's still ongoing because it was one of a process where we were trying to layer resilient building around anticipatory action. So from all the processes that we went through, we managed to do an evaluation where we tried to look at what went well and what went wrong, so that we learn from the different activities that we implemented as part of anticipatory action. So in terms of what went well, we realized that the timing of the intervention was effective, as 91% of the project participants indicated that the early cash came in at the right time to meet their food needs. Because given the crisis or the crop calendar, the peak season for the drought in Zimbabwe starts around October. That's when they start feeling the negative impacts of drought. So our interventions came right on time. Then in terms of the cash system being unconditional, it provided the participants freedom as well as dignity in terms of how to use the cash, as evidenced by some buying food, of course, but some used the money to even pay for school fees as well as medical fees, since I indicated earlier that the source of livelihood for most of our communities is rain-fed agriculture. So their fees, their medical fees all come from that. Then in terms of the cash, most of the households indicated that the cash was sufficient to cover their typical average household expenditure. So I think based on the expenditure basket minimum amounts that we used, I think it was making sense. Then in terms of diversification of income sources through supporting the income generating activities, since I said we layered our cash-based transfer with IGS, it made sense to diversify like income sources. Then in terms of improved access to rural finance through the establishment of new ISAOs and trainings on that one. The training component was also there to support the participants to start ISAO groups where they will be doing savings and which is another source which is kind of sustainable in terms of financial savings. Then in terms of the lessons that we learned from the whole process is the issue of the timing for the financial literacy training. Because like I indicated on the crisis timeline, we did our trainings after the first disbursements of the cash. So in terms of promoting the application of the skill, it was going to make sense if we have done the training before the first disbursement. So for future reference, I think financial literacy trainings, we really need to do them before the first distributions. And another learning point was the issue of preparedness, internal preparedness, in terms of putting in place structures to ensure smooth movement of the cash distribution process. I think it was a learning curve for us because we were not prepared enough. We did not give ourselves enough time to engage the service provider, so the processes took longer than anticipated, resulting in delays in starting the cash distributions. Then in terms of follow-up awareness raising on food and nutrition, I think it's one of the main critical components that we need to mainstream as part of the action, so that in as far as food is now accessible, but in terms of the nutrition component, I think we really need to ensure that we improve on that, ensuring that in as far as they reduce the negative consumption strategies, but the component of nutrition needs to be factored in. Then in terms of capacity buildings by government structures on diversification of IGS, is one of the critical issues that we identified, that was identified by the communities during the early action processes planning, to say they really need these government structures, which are already existing structures, like the extension services providers, to continuously provide capacity in terms of trainings on IGA, so that they can also initiate these without even external support from different NGOs. I think that's it in terms of our experience using the cash-based transfer here in Zimbabwe. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anastasia, and Sibongile as well. Great to hear those two examples of using cash in a way similar, in a way also different. So thanks a lot. I would like to dive into some of the questions that we find in the Slido, because I think some of them basically refer to both of you. The first one to Sibongile is, if you had previous arrangements with mobile service providers, so how did the process go? How did you agree with them on the distribution of the cash? And that maybe goes and maybe you can answer that as well, Anastasia, because you said that was an issue that you realized in terms of preparedness, how to with the financial service providers. So I would be very interested to hear that from you as well, how you agreed with the financial service providers. So Sibongile first, and then maybe Anastasia.
Thank you very much, Karen. In terms of the agreement with the mobile service providers, yes, we had previous agreements with the mobile service providers, but it was in the response phase where we were responding to drought, COVID, and the windstorms. So basically, what was in our agreement, it's one, to maybe as the responsibility of the service provider, for ensure that the agents or people who would be supporting, who would be providing support within the area where we would be doing the intervention, there is enough cash that would be withdrawn at the agent sites. And also they also help with the registration to ensure that all these beneficiaries have registered for the e-wallet or the mobile cash e-wallet. And during the first transfer, what normally happens...
Sorry, go ahead, Sibongile.
Okay. During the transfer, the payment process, they also support with that, but actually the payment process is done by the Lesotho Red Cross, because now we are using a system or a dashboard that is being used. They're only supporting trainings and to ensure that those people are able to do the payment processes. And also in terms of the report, they also do capacity of how we analyze the reports, and also we get feedback. And even in terms of after making the transaction, like the transactional reports, they also provide that with that. And how the beneficiaries have used the cash, especially for those who normally use, like, not withdrawing the money, but using the wallet also to purchase some food. We also have quarterly updates of how the money has been utilized. Thank you.
Super, thanks. Anastasia, what do you?
Yeah, thank you. Like I indicated, that in terms of our practical situation, we were not, with the time that we allocated for preparing for this was not enough, because we really needed to hear. It was a first time experience for us to do the cash distributions with this service product provider. So we wanted to have a contract with them, agree on the terms and conditions, and also agree in terms of the data protection agreements. All those processes required both legal teams from the different organizations to agree on different things. So that was the disadvantage that we had. But now the contract is now there with the service provider, and we, for our experience in terms of having money available, it was part of the terms and conditions to say the money to be given to the communities should be in US dollars, and the service provider should have that money whenever they are doing the disbursements. And also agreed in terms of mobile cash distribution points to say our communities, they stay in very faraway places from the central, the word central points. So the service provider, we had to agree with them beforehand so that we have mobile money distribution centers, and it worked very well. Then in terms of the way we did our registrations, we followed the template that the service provider was working with. So it made life very easy for us. Yeah.
Super, thanks for both of your clarifications. I would like to draw our attention a bit to another topic, and that is the topic of how the cash is used. I understand that in both contexts, the cash is unconditional. On the other hand, in Zimbabwe, you have these income generating activities that are somewhat accompanying the cash. And in Lesotho, Sibongile, you also have the early warning messages. So I would like to understand better how the cash is basically, like how this is linked to the other activities, because I mean, the cash is still unconditional, but still you are somehow linking this with the early warning messages or the income generating activities. So I would like to understand better, what is your thinking? Do you advise people on how to use the cash in these circumstances? And maybe you can elaborate a bit on that. Anastasia, do you want to start and then hand it over to Sibongile?
It's okay. Thank you so much. Like I indicated, the other activities around income generating activities was layered on top of the early action intervention. So the same participants who received early cash were the same participants that were trained on financial literacy, savings, as well as different ways of doing income generating activities. So we were not kind of prescribing the activities that they were supposed to do with the money that we gave them, but we did the trainings as complementary activities for them to make the informed decisions based on the skills that we impart on them. For example, if you we do the cash distributions and you have received the training on savings, on how to start a business, an income generating business, I think it was there to build like a resilience building initiative where the community food, but also think around the issues to do some projects that can sustain the income. Then the issue of income generating activities was also layered. We gave them starter packs based on what they identified as the feasible short-term interventions that can also add value to the cash that we gave them. So we did not prescribe as well, but it came from the trainings, what the communities felt was feasible in the 3 months that we were supporting them to have as a project that can give them another source of income on top of the early cash. So they identified broiler chick production, which is around 6 weeks in terms of the project life cycle. So it was not like a prescription, but a complementary activity to support the early cash that we gave the communities. Yeah.
Thank you, Anastasia. And Sibongile, how do the early warning messages link with the early cash or the cash distributions?
Thank you very much, Karen. In terms of how we link the early warning messages to the cash transfer, to the unconditional cash transfer, what we do in terms of the early actions, the early warning messages is to disseminate information regarding to drought and also looking at different sectors in terms of in terms of different livelihoods, covering different livelihoods activities. But now linking it to unconditional cash transfer, what we propose to do in terms of our EAP is to have these early warning messages moving alongside the cash transfers. This is where we would be doing some of the cash transfers activity, cash transfers activities like verifications of beneficiary list prior to making cash transfer. Would also have information where we would, at that area, this is also where we would disseminate early warning messages and also financial literacy in terms of how the cash is intended to be used and how the communities and other stakeholders can support in that process. Also to add on that, in terms of also strengthening this, we have also adapted also the use of the community engagement and accountability system, where communities and stakeholders and beneficiaries would be given a chance to give feedback on whether the cash really benefited them or what are the challenges in terms of the grievances that they have in terms of cash transfer. Where we have in place suggestion box, help desk made of community members, our Red Cross volunteers, and also since now we are talking about social protection programs, this is where also now we are going to include the issue of also having the auxiliary social workers, because they're the ones who are based in communities and who are living with this community members on a daily basis. So these are the systems that we have put in place to ensure that one, they help with the feedback and also they help with the issue of financial literacy.
Thank you very much, Sibongile and Anastasia. We are a little bit on after the top of the hour. For those who need to drop already, please drop out. For those who can stay, you're welcome to stay. We will have time to answer some more questions and then also to discuss a bit more. So yeah, feel free to stay, but if you have another call, please feel also free to leave. I would like to go back to the Slido now. And the next question that was voted up a lot was that, I think that is targeted to you, Sibongile, is the question, does the targeting based on public assistance waiting lists mean that younger people, for example, youth-led households, are excluded? And maybe that links nicely with the second question, on how is it to work with a social protection program. Humanitarians usually partner with disaster management authorities, but social protection is new for many of us. So what are the opportunities and challenges? Sibongile, maybe you can tackle them both together.
Thank you very much, Karen. Maybe to start with the last question that was raised on how humanitarian organization, disaster management authority, and also the government entities work together to scaling up shock responsive social protection program. I'll maybe making an example of Lesotho, where we have the disaster management authority basically mandated to work on disaster risk reduction. And also we have the Ministry of Social Development, which works with social protection programs. And also we also have the humanitarian organizations that actually act as auxiliary to this government entity. So in how it is done in Lesotho, basically is normally to make this work, firstly, we have highlighted documents that are already in place that are more like helping organizations and humanitarian and government entities to work towards the social protection part, where we have the Disaster Management Authority leading that, and also the Ministry of Social Development. The agreement that is between the Disaster Management Authority and the Ministry of Social Development basically is the guiding line for humanitarian organizations. For example, in terms of emergency, to ensure that we use social protection programs, our entry point is the Disaster Management Authority, who, after having consultations and working closely with them as humanitarian organizations, then that is then taken further to the Ministry of Social Development. Also to highlight that there are technical working groups that are there within the country, which are under different sectors, but basically we have most of them under the Disaster Management Authority, where we have the Early Action and Early Warning Technical Working Group. This is a group where we also have representatives from the humanitarian organizations, the Ministry of Social Development, and the Disaster Management Authority. So this is where any organizations that wants to pilot the issue of social protection program usually highlight their interest and start working together. And in terms of before any response or any activation, we usually again have what we call a pre-plenary meeting, where we have different stakeholders highlighting where they're going to do their interventions, how their targeting is going to be done. Is it community-based? Are they going to use the social protection program? So this is how basically it helps in ensuring that we are scaling up shock responsive social protection program. I think the first question was who, basically in summary it says who are included. Are the youth excluded? And that, okay, I like the slide that I indicated that we have different social protection programs in Lesotho. Maybe to mention, we have a child grant, which is basically looking at children who are below 18. Then we have the old age pension, which looks at elderly people who are 70 and above. So in between here, we have a range of over 18, which is 19 to 69. These are the vulnerable. If the households are vulnerable, they are covered under the public assistance. So being a youth, as long as it's a vulnerable youth, it's covered under the public assistance. Thank you.
Super. Thank you so much, Sibongile, for this for this answer. And I think there's lots of interest. Also, I see in the chat people responding to very interesting to see the link between social protection and shock responsive anticipatory action, and like linking all the topics. So thanks a lot. I would have a set of questions for you, Anastasia, as well. And one is the question whether WHH in Zimbabwe also works with the Zimbabwe Red Cross that is also working on drought. And then a question that is not so much linked is the question that you talked about, the over-research. So if you could clarify a bit this over-research. The question is, from community engagement and accountability, good to consult the communities, validate it, and share reports. So one, if you work with the Zimbabwe Red Cross, and second, maybe to spend some clarification or words on the over-research.
It's okay. Thank you. To answer the first question, yes, we worked very well with the Zimbabwe Red Cross, because what we did as part of project planning and coordination, we formed what we termed the community of practice, which is an assembly of different partners that are into focus-based action, focus-based financing, as well as anticipatory action. So this group has organizations from the NGOs, the UN agencies, all the players that had interest in anticipatory action. And Zimbabwe Red Cross was one of the members of this community of practice. So we had what we called our 3W list, where each and every agency indicated the areas that they were operating in, as well as the hazards that they were targeting. So there were areas of complementarity with different partners, including Zimbabwe Red Cross Society. So we knew very well that Zimbabwe Red Cross was working in Chipinge for drought-related issues, and in Chimanimani for floods and cyclone-related issues, whilst we were targeting Chimanimani for drought-related issues. So that improved our operations as players in as far as coordinating the anticipatory action interventions is concerned. So we really worked with Red Cross, and we shared experience where even when they were presenting their early action protocol, we also made some contributions to that, and we also presented ours and they made some contributions. So we had very good relations with different players, including Zimbabwe Red Cross. Then on the issue of over-researching communities, I think there was a guide that was presented in the chat box by Julia, where it's indicating the step-by-step process that we went through in trying to develop this early actions. The first point of call was general custodian activities, where we engaged the stakeholders at district level, national level, and provincial level. Then we went further down to the community just to introduce this theme of anticipatory action and the proposed actions. Then we went back. Then we then went to the next step, which was around identification. Then we mobilized the communities again to identify the drought impact, to identify the negative coping strategies. Then we produced a report. We mobilized the communities again to identify feasible early actions and to prioritize their early actions. So the time that we spent mobilizing the communities, bringing them together, I think they have a lot of things to do. So we felt it was like we are spending more time with them. Why not do the things concurrently? Like the awareness raising program, just going into the community, raise awareness on what we want to do, then do the drought and coping strategy, drought impact and coping strategy activity, as well as the identification of early actions at the same time, other than going back and forth, having time with communities. That is where the over-researching part came about. But the same processes should be followed, because we want their inputs at all levels. But the time should maybe be done, the processes should be done concurrently to avoid bringing the communities together time and again.
Thank you so much for sharing this, Anastasia. Yeah, and I think this expectation management also with communities is certainly something in anticipatory action that can be a challenge, because of course we don't know when we are going to trigger, right? So that is always something that, yeah, we don't collect the data for this very point in time but for another situation. So yeah, thanks for sharing your approach to that. I would like to stop the recording now and give everybody the chance to also share their experiences if they want. And there are some more questions in the chat, but maybe since we are such a small group now, we can also use the time to exchange in this more informal way in the small group. Thanks again, Anastasia and Sibongile. And yeah, please, for those of you who are still here and you have questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and comment or pose your question. We have another 15 minutes if you'd like to discuss a little bit.